You're listening to the So What? Why It Matters podcast with Nancy Hicks. Each week we'll ask the question, so what? And dive into the answers of why it matters with Nancy and her guest. Are you ready for some honest conversation about the so what's in your life? Then let's get to it. Here's Nancy.
Hi there, Nancy Hicks here, and welcome back to So What? Why It Matters. We're continuing on in our Rethinking Self-Care series, and I have to say that I'm becoming more and more aware of the desperate need that we have to pull back, to say no, to draw the boundary lines, to push pause, because it's such a fast-paced society. We are overstimulated, we're under pressure. For many of us, we have pushed those precious moments of self-care to the sidelines, to the margins. And frankly, in the wake of all that, some of us are way overdue for a recharge. How do we get ourselves back to a place of recharging for that self-care? That's what we want to talk about so that we can get to that place of joy, so that we can commit to caring for ourselves, so that we can feel confident again and loved again. So this week, I'm excited because the light, bright, and snappy guest that we had to talk about some of these things and to give us really great insights is a woman that is just full of joy. So we had the privilege of speaking with the lovely Margaret Feinberg. If you didn't guess who I was talking about when I said light, bright, and snappy, yes, it's Margaret Feinberg. And if you're not familiar with her, well, she's a writer and she's a speaker, and she's written books like Scouting the Divine, and a favorite of mine, Taste and See, Discovering God Among Butchers, Bakers, and Fresh Food Makers, since we're foodies in our family, and her latest 2020 devotional, More Power to You. She's the host of the Joycast podcast, and on that show, she encourages everyone to spark their joy and love their precious life. And we all need that, I think, these days, don't we? So I think you're really going to enjoy our conversation, and hopefully it helps you as you seek to recharge your heart, your mind, and your soul this year. So here is my talk with Margaret Feinberg. Margaret, welcome to So What? Why It Matters today. I'm so glad to have you with me.
Woohoo! I am so beyond thrilled, giggly, full of joy, bubbles and sparklies and all the things to be here with you.
So we are thrilled. I'm thrilled personally to have you on the show. Part of this rethinking self-care. Okay, that's what we're talking about. That is our topic. Before we do that, I want to talk to you about you.
You know what? I have this wild background in that I was born in Cocoa Beach, Florida, with parents in the surfing industry. We lived near the Cherokee Native American Reservation in Maggie Valley, North Carolina. Grew up on the ski hills of Steamboat Springs, Colorado. And I think it's all that moving around, including even falling in love with my husband in Sitka, Alaska. When I graduated from college, thought if there was anything that I could do with my life, and time and money were not factors, I thought, I want to write. I want to tell stories. And so I started writing public little pieces in the back of magazines for 15 cents a word. And man, how many articles do you need to write a year for 15 cents a word? The answer is all of them. All of them.
Everyone that comes your way. And then the ones you go after. Okay.
Exactly. And so just use that to begin honing the skill of writing. And over the last 2 decades plus, I've had the privilege of sharing the story, not just of what I believe, the joy and the presence of God has been doing in my life, but what has been happening that's beautiful and life-giving and joyous throughout communities around the world.
So, okay, so that's it. Your passion's writing, your passion then it became bloomed into speaking as well. But is there a particular, this is my passion when it comes to writing? What is it, Margaret?
Yeah, when I write, I feel like I feel the holy hum of God's presence. I think Eric Liddell sensed something like that when he ran. And it is this joy, and it is this, when you're in that spot and that creativity is flowing, it is complete magic and life to me. But I think that if I get to write about just kind of the wonder of this world and the wonder of God and the wonder of each other, that helps us see life anew with hope and a freshness, that is what I'm put on this earth to help do.
Okay, so that I think is a gorgeous segue. Thank you very much to the question around self-care. So, this is the question we're talking about. This is the issue. It's always been an issue for women in particular, Margaret, I think. But I don't know about you, but man, I feel like it's really ramped up in the last few years as things are just the pressure cooker of life. And women can be all things and do all things. And we're going faster, faster, faster. Demands are high. So, I'd like to talk to you, and we want to now pick your brain about self care. And you talk a lot about enjoying the simple things in life, the joys of life. You talk about cooking in your books. I'm totally going to mention, of course, your books at the end of this, but talk about that. I see it on your social media, ways to reflect, ways to pull back and enjoy a meal, and the meaning behind these things, which I am all about totally. I'm curious about, for you, was there a time when you didn't get it?
Absolutely. I think for any listener who has grown up with any significant pain or loss or abuse in childhood, or perhaps in the growing up years, or even more recently has gone through maybe a difficult, painful diagnosis, something that has traumatized your body, I think what we need to realize is that in a season like this, where there have been so many challenges and the world has become more demanding, more intense, whether it's caring for the kiddos, whether it is struggling to hold your house together, stay employed, run the business, do all of the things, that in those seasons, I think that for us, a lot of times we become disconnected from our core needs, whether that be emotionally, spiritually, physically. We start running to the go, go, go. We find at times, because of the new stress and strain, that old pains and traumas from the past come to the surface. And in that disassociation, I know that I've spent much of my life struggling to reconnect, to become more mindful, to become more intentional, to pay more attention. I think one of the just most practical so what examples of this, just recently in the midst of COVID, my husband, who had reached his own point of just severe burnout from not taking care of himself, went to take care of himself. And my husband's name is Leif, a good Norwegian, like a Leif Erikson. And he went on what we call the Leif Love Tour. And he spent 3.5 weeks with family and friends who just loved on him, who just poured into him. And it was so good. But what that did is that left me alone for 3.5 weeks. And so in this 3.5 weeks, I'm sitting here thinking, man, if I don't practice good self-care, then by day 5, my face is going to be in a big bag of Doritos, drinking hot chocolate all day and watching Oprah. Do you know what I'm saying?
I do.
I will spiral. And so I had to become really intentional about self-care and remembering and actually making a mental list, even writing it down, of lists that to me are life-giving, and making sure that I started for the beginning of these 3.5 weeks enacting them multiple times a day. So some of the things that are so simple and so accessible, again, back to the so what of self-care, there are things like this for me. I love a great cup of warm chamomile or mint tea. I'm not a morning person, but if I can get up and watch the sunrise or set an alarm and make sure I see the sunset, there is something that beauty of nature and creation infuses life into me and is an act of self-care.
So, wait, you're not a morning person, you said. So, I had you wrong there. But you actually deliberately, and is this something you do daily? Like you set your alarm daily, or is this something you do periodically, like to see the sunrise? Because that's pretty beautiful. But is it practical in your life daily?
It is not practical in my life daily. But if I'm in a season where I realize my self-care is falling off the wagon and I need to inject something there, it means number one, I got to go to bed early, which isn't the easiest for me, so that I can get up early. And then if I do miss the sunset, big deal. There's a sunset every night. Grace, grace, grace.
What are some of the other things Margaret Feinberg does to rejuvenate her soul, to refresh her soul?
For instance, people are really important to me. So making sure that each day I'm spending time with people one way or another, whether it's a Zoom call, whether it's a social distance walk, whether it's sitting out on somebody's lawn and just chatting, whether it's going to maybe an outdoor lunch, whatever that may be, I make sure that I'm getting that face-to-face time every day, because I need some peoples. I love my peoples. I love my beautiful, beautiful peoples. A number of years ago, I reached a place of just absolute exhaustion and burnout at work and realizing I had to learn to rest. I had to learn to carve out some time every week to say, you know what? The whole world does not rest on my shoulders, and kind of be super personal.
Please, I wish you would. I love it.
Do you know what the telltale sign for me? And I was talking to my therapist at this time. It was that I would so often hold myself from using the restroom when I was talking to someone or doing something because I didn't want to stop and break. In other words, I would just hold it to the point of extreme pain. And I realized, you know what, this is a form of like almost self-harm in the sense of like, I'm that negligent of my own body's demands that I won't even go use the bathroom and excuse myself when I need to. And that was a ringing alarm bell that something was wrong. I think I also started to realize in my life just how I lacked boundaries. There's a wonderful book called Boundaries by Henry Cloud and John Townsend. And my therapist said, you should really read this book. And I looked at him and I said, I've read this book about 7 times. And my therapist looked at me and said, and you have not put a single thing in that book into practice.
Ding, 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 ding. Oh, girl, that's a huge thing, right?
And so there is a sense of learning to say no, learning to say, you know what, I don't have to live with a case of the supposed to's all the time. I'm supposed to be there early. I'm supposed to stay late. I'm supposed to bake the 179 cupcakes. I'm supposed to make it all from scratch. You know what, there are times that a grocery deli is just fine, people. It is just fine. And learning to accept and say, you know what, if there are triggers that I am constantly saying yes, and then afterwards I am mad at myself, or worse, I am mad at the other person or slightly resentful about it, that is a red flag to say, wait a second, in that situation, when it comes around again, to not give that knee-jerk response of yes, but to press pause, to step back and to say, you know what, I need some time to think about that. And then be able to deliver a gracious no. And to recognize by learning to give more no's, I'm actually reserving some of the best yeses for the most life-giving things that I can do out of pure joy, that I can do without a second thought, that I can do without needing a thank you, without any of that, and living, I think, a healthier life, which again is one more form of self-care, Nancy.
I love that, Margaret. I think you're bang on. I really understand the whole self-care. What you said a moment ago, we know these things, but we don't do them. I want to come to that in a moment, but I want to talk first about basics versus extras. Give us some of the basics that we women know, and that just give me like 30-second. Here are some of the basics all women we should know. Okay, go for it.
Nancy, if we are breathing shallowly, regularly, something is off. We have got to learn to pause and breathe deeply to recenter ourselves. If we are not finding an opportunity to laugh hard at least once every day,
girl,
something is off. And we need to put in our favorite comedians, whatever it may be, until we laugh until tears run down our cheeks and other places.
So you think that should happen daily? That's like a basic, or maybe not daily, but often.
Often. I think that a good night's sleep is something that we need to fight for. And if that means saying no to our favorite Netflix show, I know it hurts me too. It hurts me too. Schitt's Creek is one of my favorites.
Is it? I'm watching The Crown.
Love it. Love it. But maybe I don't need to watch all 5 episodes tonight.
Right,
maybe I can go to bed a little earlier. And maybe I need to talk to my doctor if for a little season, maybe I need some medication or some, different alternatives that are healthy to help me get a good night's sleep. I think drinking enough water, I think thinking about what we're eating. I'm not talking like the 0 carb, you're never eating anything fun in your life again diet. I'm talking about just saying, hey, are we eating more things each day that make us feel good about ourselves, that maybe make us feel maybe a little regretful or not as good? Those I would go to the very lowest shelf cookie basics.
Yeah. Okay. There we are. Basics, right? Am I moving my body, especially in this time when I'm in front of the computer a heck of a lot more than I ever. I mean, in my career before being a Christian speaker and doing podcasts and lots of writing, oh my golly, my body was on the move. Now I have to schedule movement. Like basics, such basics. Okay. So of those basics, what's the one that you struggle with most?
You know what? I would say my biggest struggle, it's 2, they go hand in hand. It is eating healthy and exercising well. Because I get in these ruts, like once I eat sugar, I want more sugar and more sugar and more sugar. And then exercise, when I'm in the exercise, like doing it, I'm in. But once I fall off the wagon, it's so much more inertia to get back to whether it's swimming, hiking, walking, snowshoeing, whatever it might be.
Wow. And you're very active, aren't you? Hiking and all this like great stuff.
I love it. Space and quiet, time to reflect is so important. I know friends who, in the craziness of their house with all their kids, are just climb in their car and sit there by themselves or go for a long drive. Like whatever it takes for you to find that space to reflect, to quiet your mind, to quiet yourself is so crucial. I also want to throw out there something that probably a little bit not basics, but a little bit next level in self
Well,
care.
that's okay, fine, because that's where we're going next anyway. So, what do you consider like, okay, now let's kick it up and do some extras? Yeah.
Yeah,
What?
I think that I would Marie Kondo, that sweet little spark joy lady. I would Marie Kondo our self-care lives in the fact that I would look for opportunities to spark joy all around your house. So for me, it may be saving up and buying my favorite shampoo and conditioner and perfume and having little soaps around the house that I love, maybe having a soundtrack of songs that just spark joy in me. So that actually your house and your life, even in the busyness, when you go to these little corners, you find these things that communicate, you know what, I am worth it and I'm worth being celebrated. Because when we know we're worth it and we know that we're celebrated, we are better equipped and empowered to celebrate and embrace others.
I love that. And I think, it sounds simple. It sounds so rudimentary, but I will tell you, as someone who loves me, my whole background is music. I was a singer back in Toronto and musical theater, concert work, that was my thing. But you know what's interesting? We moved to the US 20 years ago. And there have been times, so my son has stage 4 colon cancer, Margaret. He's 27 years old. And we've been going through this, since I don't know what, almost 2 years it'll be. And I will tell you sometimes, and especially during COVID, where we haven't been able to worship in church, we haven't been able to people of God, I have been shocked at myself when I know music is such a vital part of my very being, how I forgot to put it on. That is like breath to me. And yet I have forgotten at times to put on. So I'm like, what are you thinking, Nancy? Put the music on, get the music, the uplifting. And I'm not talking chipper, happy, la, la, la all the time, but I'm amazed at how we forget to do some of those, call them basics or call them more elevated gifts of recharging.
I think you're right. And I know that in my own cancer journey, a number of years ago, I battled an aggressive form of cancer. And I remember there was one day I was going back for chemo and it was just more than I could just face. I'd been flunking out of chemo, allergic to the treatments, and I had to go back for yet another. I remember my husband put a song on it. I think it was 10,000 Reasons. The drive is about a 50-mile drive. And we just started singing and the hot tears are running down my cheeks. We get to the end of that song and he presses it again and again. And we sang it the whole way there. And that was the day that I discovered that a doctor's office could become a portal of praise, that a waiting room could become a place of worship. I remember having to crawl in that machine. I call it Ride the Donut, the MRI machine at the hospital. Us frequent flyers were like, yeah, ride the donut. And so I climb in there and the voice says, don't move. And you suddenly become as itchy as a little 5-year-old kid. And I remember laying there and thinking, has anybody offered up praise from this square inch? And that is when I learned that one of the most powerful ways that we practice self-care and we poke holes in the darkness, no matter what darkness you listeners may be facing, is that we do it one square inch at a time. And that today you can be somebody, as you are listening right now, who identifies the darkest place in your life. It may be in your classroom, it may be in your living room, it may be in your bedroom, it may be where you work, it may be in your retirement community, but you can identify that darkest place and begin offering up praise one square inch at a time. And when you do, you declare that the darkness has not and will not win.
So I'm going to be really honest with you and with our listeners. And I want to say that I am such a fighter. I am such a forward thinker, visionary thinker, in love with God, like powerhouse. And as I sat with God just this morning, we're in a hard place. I mean, the pandemic, our son's diagnosis, not being with the people of God, the way we've been in the past, navigating all this. You can relate. You, Margaret, and everybody listening can relate to this in some form or fashion. And I sat with God just this morning and I said, show me how to fight again. Show me how to fight. And I went to some classic texts around what we're supposed to do, like the Ephesians text. As I read the text this morning, I looked at God. I mean, couldn't really see him, but I looked and I was like, I don't feel like fighting. I'm tired of fighting. I am so tired of being the one to fight. I'm just tired. And I know in that place, well, I don't know anything. You talk to me about that. What do you say to a woman who's sitting here going, don't tell me to recharge by fighting. Don't tell me I have to do X, Y, and Z. I just frickin' can't. Can you speak to her?
I can, because I've been there, and in some ways I am there right now. What I would say to you and what I remind myself of every day is when we can't, that is when he can. And it is precisely in the moments when we are in that weakness and that brokenness and that give it upness and that it can't get any worse and I can't take any more. And the storm clouds are so stinking heavy and it is so dark and it is raining so much. And we cry out, God, I can't. He says, I can. And he can because he is the great I am. And when we can't fight, he fights on our behalf. And in some ways, when we can't fight, we actually give him more space and more room to fight on our behalf than when we have our best warrior genes on. If you look at the spiritual journey, there are stages that you can go through, and there's a wonderful book called The Critical Journey. But there's a stage, it's called the wall. And it's that place where you have done and you have fought and you've done all that you can and you are just empty. And you kind of feel like you've hit the wall. And yet it's in that place in spiritual growth, that in the letting go, in the dropping down, in the giving up, that there is so much powerful transformation, exposure, and healing that takes place. That through moving through that in the place of I can't, often God doesn't just do more in that place, but he's able to do more through you after.
If I asked you, what do women need most? What would you say? A makeover? The perfect partner? A child? A career? I don't think so. What we women need most is to step into who God has already declared we are. That's why I want to tell you about my free download called to Confidence. This 20-day guide gives you the 20 ways that you can reclaim your identity from the details that get you sidetracked, like your home, your career, and your relationships. Plus, there's plenty of journaling space so you can reflect on the ways that God is helping you grow into a strong woman of grace. My hope is that these confidence builders breathe life into your soul and help you remember your God-given power. You can download your copy of Call to Confidence through the link in today's show notes at nancyhickslive.com/podcast. So, were you surprised during COVID by what you needed to do or not do to keep yourself whole or even recharge in a whole new way?
I was shocked at how doing so little could make me so exhausted.
Wow.
I don't know if any of the listeners have experienced this, but it is being a creative and somebody who writes. I mean, I could write for 8-10 hours a day, and now I'd write 4. I'd write an eighth as much, and I'd be like, that's all I got. That's all I got. And what I've discovered talking to the other creatives in our creative community is they've all sensed the same thing. And so if you're working in a creative avenue, whether that's, drawing building plans or singing or writing books or songs or stage or whatever that is out of that creativity, it's like the well that we all grew strong and new, it suddenly became so much shallower and all the water was gone so much quicker.
How did you shift in 2020 during COVID? What shifts or change did you make that you may carry post-COVID?
You know what? One of the things, and back to self-care, the so what? Do you know what rejuvenates creativity for me like nothing else?
No.
Play. In whatever form that takes. And so a little drive away trip where we explore a little town that we've never been to, whether it's, playing games with friends, outside, whatever that is, being intentional about play, which is so funny because you're like, play just happens. Well, play happens when you're a kid. Play doesn't always happen when you're an adult.
Oh, we suck at it when we're older. Unless we have friends that go, oh, knock it off and stop taking yourself so seriously. You know what I mean, Margaret?
Me and Leif will go play. I'll call one of my friends. We'll pick a place on the map that we don't know and just be like, hey, do you want to go explore this? Or like we have these, and some of you experience, but like there are these new creations to make outdoor seating at restaurants safer. And so we have one near us. And because it's all clear, it's like a snow globe. And so I have one of my quarantiners who I was like, what if we went and had a snow globe lunch together? Like,
oh, now, do you always initiate or do you have other playful people in your life? Like Leif, does he play or do you typically initiate?
I am often the initiator. I find that I'm usually the one with the wild hair ideas, but I'm also your friend who will always say yes.
Oh.
So if you have one, I'm game.
Wait, where are you living right now? Where do you live right now?
Oh, I live in Park City, Utah.
What's the weather like right now?
Yeah, right now we got some snow. We got blue skies, snow, ski areas open, rock and roll.
It's raining here today. I'm in Pennsylvania.
Ooh.
Raining and gray. So you know what helps me, rejuvenates me? Turn the flippin' lights on. Get the lights on. Open the blinds. Open the drapes. That is so basic, Margaret. Is that something that you get?
Goodness.
I know
yes.
It sounds funny. Light.
Yes. No, Nancy. So when I met and fell in love with my husband in Sitka, Alaska. And so in Alaska, we're talking about 18 hours of darkness during the winter combined with 300 days of rain in Southeast Alaska. Okay. I'm a
5 years you did that. Okay.
5 years. I feel like I should get trophies.
You should.
Yeah.
You should.
Definitely trophies. But there, the question about depression, like there was no stigma. The question wasn't, are you depressed? Everybody's vitamin D deficient. Like you just can't. And so the question is, how are you going to do it? And so one of our they would bring in truckloads in the fall of happy lights. And they had a special light bulb in them. And you can buy the light bulbs now, just plug them in wherever you sit. Start getting your body just the nutrients from good light that it needs. I cannot agree with you more. Others, again, back to eating well, exercising, being intentional about relationships. As a community, because it was so small, we knew each other. We'd be like, well, so-and-so has disappeared. Got to ring them up. Let's throw a dinner party. Let's get them out. And just that community recognizing practicing self-care is not just a solo act. Practicing self-care involves others. It's a communal act and it matters.
Well, girl, I love what you just said. We need to say it again. Practicing self-care is not done in isolation. It can be. There are benefits to being alone and the quiet, and we talked about that. But I love what you said, Margaret. It is not something that you need to think about in isolation. It still can be and is a community thing. Absolutely. And it affects the community, of course. I love that. Not just self, community, 100% in with you on that. Okay, so give me one then. So would you say play then during COVID was one of those things, Margaret, that you're like, oh, I'm going to take this and I'm going to bottle it up and take it post-COVID?
Absolutely. Whenever I run dry, now I'll be like, play. And I wouldn't have thought that before COVID. I wouldn't have thought I need to go play, but that is just really, it's crux to who I am. It's how I'm wired. Play brings me to life. I think another one is the importance of giving. And I think I gave in the past, but there is this sense that I talk about joy a lot, but joy is something that you can give away even when you don't have it. In part of my self-care, the way that I know that I will spiral upward instead of spiral downward is by doing something kind or thoughtful or generous for someone else. And it does not have to be complex. I do not need to macrame for 19 hours because number one, I don't know how to macrame. I don't have 19 hours.
Right.
Yeah. But it may be just calling someone and saying, hey, can I come over this week? I know you're not able to leave the house and sit on your lawn and just talk for 20 or 30 minutes outside, or picking up a gift card or having a stack of them and mailing them to those who are hurting or in need, or texting just encouraging words or a funny meme. But in that act of thinking of someone else, we're actually caring for ourselves.
Oh, I love that. And then there's the woman, of course, who's like, no, I'm always the one initiating. In fact, I was thinking when you were talking about how you do a lot of the initiating, I have a friend that I walk with every Wednesday. She actually works on my ministry team. And she told me sometimes, so she's a single woman raising a couple of sons. And she's like, sometimes I just feel like doing something and I reach out to people and no one can do anything. So you know what I mean? So sometimes, what do you do in a situation like that, Margaret? If
you plan further out. And that is something. So there are people who have super busy schedules, and we may have something 6 weeks or 8 weeks out to be able to see them. So I'm thinking long term about planning. Nancy, I started speaking a number of years ago, would spend up to 200 days a year on the road. And when you do that, what happens is that people who spend every weekend together at home suddenly kind of, you fall out of their lives. And what I realized is for a season of my life, I felt really hurt. I felt left out. I felt alone. I felt like I couldn't. And then I realized, wait a second, I'm traveling a lot. I'm just going to make the decision to be the initiator. And I'm not going to be mad about it. I'm not going to be sad about it. I'm not going to be resentful about it, but I'm going to start initiating. I'm going to start filling out my calendar. And if it starts for 4 or 6 or 8 weeks from now, maybe it's not a full afternoon. Maybe it's a 30-minute gathering, but taking hold of that and fighting for those relationships and not being discouraged because someone says no. Say, okay, what about the next Saturday? What can we carve out to be intentional about this relationship? And you know what? If you're surrounded by people who have a ton of littles and you've got littles and it's not matching up, go spend time with the retired people. They are a barrel of fun. They are so awesome. They have scads of free time and they're so excited to have you in their life. Baby, go get them.
I love that. You know what? I remember years ago, Margaret, this is so great because there are always people. Years ago, when Cam and I, my husband's Cam, when we were leaving Toronto to move to the US, we had a couple over for dinner. Well, he had been an ambassador to China for like 25 years. And she gave me such great advice, this woman. She said to me, the number one thing I'm going to say to you as you move to the US is when you don't have a friend, be a friend. That was very helpful for me because I am a friendly person. I have my friends. I got my posse. I love to meet new people, but sometimes you don't want to work so hard. You just want to rely on, these are my peeps. But the fact is, if you're going to move to a new area, or if you're in a new season of your life, or if you feel like my friends just they don't even know me anymore for whatever the reasons are. But it also may be exactly what you said, Margaret, when you don't have a friend, be a friend. Look for somebody that you can reach out to and serve and love in a really powerful way. I love that, Margaret. Thank you. Thank
Can
you
I
for
add
that.
to that?
Please. Oh,
I think,
please.
I think this is really important for the listeners out there for whom your life has not followed what was the traditional life script. And I speak to that for myself, my husband, Leif, and I. So we don't have children. And there's a variety of medical and otherwise reasons for that. But as a result, when I'm in my early 30s and all my friends have littles and I don't, I'm not invited down to the play yard. I'm not invited. And so we started spending time with college students and those whose kids were old enough to drive. And what we found throughout our life is that if you're looking for someone to be your exact age in the traditional life script, and your life script doesn't follow that, maybe you haven't gotten married, you don't get married, you don't have children, you get a divorce, whatever that is, look outside the traditional life script because there are tons of us out here who would love to play with you.
So there's this presupposition, Margaret, that we are already destined, hardwired to love/care for ourselves. So when we're not doing the bubble baths, or we're not getting our sleep, or we're not eating well, or we're not going for our walk, what's happening really? Something is going on in there, right? It's a different kind of self-care, preservation. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah. I think that part of that declaration to love yourself, I think there's many reasons that we don't do it. Sometimes it's because of terrible messages we got as a child that we don't matter, that we're not worthy, that we don't deserve good things. I think that there's a variety of things like that. But what I know is that if we don't mind our thought life, because our thought life will determine our attitudes, our actions, our behaviors. But if we don't mind our thought life, what essentially happens is that we can come into agreement with things that are not true. And I know a couple of years ago, I reached that point in my own life, and it just got dark and murky. And I remember I was sitting across one of my longtime friends at lunch, and my friend Chris, and he looked at me and he said, "Margaret, I don't know when or where it happened, but somewhere along the way, you have made agreements with the universe that are not true."
Whoa.
And I went, whew. And at first, part of me was like, well, that sounds a little woo-woo, like agreements with the universe that are not true. But what I realized is that he was right. I mean, where I had started out with this bubbly and this joy and this just excitement, this thoughts had come into my life. Things like, you're a has-been, you're too old, you have nothing more to give, you're a failure, you should just give up. And at first I acknowledged those thoughts. And then I started to entertain those thoughts. And then I crossed a very important spiritual threshold in which I came into agreement with those thoughts. And what I found is those kinds of thoughts and such negativity and downward spirals began starting to shape not just my attitudes, but my actions and my behaviors. And so I was living into them. And for me to take back my life and regain my power, I needed to untangle the lies from the truth. And so I started going through and started to think about like, what am I thinking about? What am I paying attention to? And I started making a list of daily declarations deeply rooted in scripture. Jesus is my King. I am who God says I am. I take every thought captive. I break every agreement that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. Worry is not my boss. Shame is not my master. God's power is perfected in my vulnerability. I will not lean on my own understanding, but in every way I will acknowledge God and he will make my path straight. And what I found is that as I carved out these deeply biblically ancient Hebrew, Greek rooted statements, that as I began proclaiming them out loud, that something began to kind of shift in my life. I began to say, I don't want to live into this negativity anymore. I want to live into the life-giving joy of God through the person of Jesus Christ. And man, do you know, it wasn't 72 hours later until my husband looked at me and he said, Margaret, I do not know what has happened, but you are lighter and freer than I have seen in months. I share this list in More Power to You. And I know you've seen that book, but it's this idea of if you'll take 90 seconds a day and begin declaring these things that are very true, and the list is in there, out loud. You're not just saying them to yourself. You're not just saying them to God. You're not just saying them to the darkness that tries to send storm clouds over you. But what you're actually doing, and brain science teaches us, is you're rewiring your brain. Neuroscientists love to say, the neurons that fire together wire together. And so if you are listening and you're constantly going to self-sabotaging thoughts, I can't do this. This is too hard. This is too much for me. There's no way I can get through this. Your brain is actually wiring. It's building a super highway. So you will go to that destination quicker and quicker and quicker. And yet when you start declaring the truth of who you are and who you're created to be around that which is life-giving and hopeful and truth and upward lifting, then you are dismantling those super highways and you're beginning to build new highways in your thoughts. So those life-giving thoughts are the first things you go to. And man, that is some self-care.
What's that book again? Because that sounds like such a great book people should pick up.
Yeah. It's called More Power to You. Break free from fear and take your life back. And what you'll find is some of the thoughts, and you're not going to identify them immediately as self-sabotaging and that you're thinking this and it's not self-care, but believe me, it is working against your self-care. When you start thinking things like, I need to make everybody happy, or I have to do it on my own, or I'll never get through this, or getting older is the worst, or the world is totally messed up. And what I do is I unpack how that kind of thinking starts self-sabotaging yourself. Man, it is the opposite of practicing next level self-care.
I love that. I love that. And I think that really is something worth thinking about. So tell me 3 quick questions just to wrap us up, if you're okay with that. If you literally have zero time, for some women, they've just had a baby and they're like, are you kidding me? I just had triplets, whatever. Or you're a single woman and you have these deadlines like crazy. You've talked about being on the road a lot. What is one thing you will absolutely not give up in terms of self-care? What is that one thing?
Fighting for a good night's sleep.
Love it. Sleep. Highly underrated. And it's an issue in today's society. Thank you for that. And I would love to know who's been your best example, Margaret, of self-care. You look at, you go, man, there's a model for me.
I would say my friend, Susie. She knows how to fight for self-care. She will crawl into her car and sit in the parking lot if she has to just get that quiet time she needs.
I love it. And then last one before we get to how we can keep connecting with you, because we definitely want to do that. Okay, so if we boil it all down in one sentence, so what? So what? Why does this matter?
It matters because you're worth it. And everything in this world is going to try to tell you that you're not, that you have to keep running harder and faster and do more and go, go, go. And it's all on you. But it's not. Put on your oxygen mask first. Take care of yourself because you are worthy and you are worth it.
I'm unbelievably grateful that you've been a part of this. I'm grateful you've shared your wisdom and your experience and just being real with me. I'm so grateful. So tell us how we can stay connected with Margaret Feinberg.
Absolutely. You can visit margaretfeinberg.com, Feinberg, great Jewish name there. And you could also find me on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter at MA Feinberg as well.
I love it. Margaret, we will. I sure will and have, but I want to encourage everyone. I want to encourage you through this podcast means to stay connected to this woman. She's worth it too. So thank you, Margaret Feinberg. Well, I just loved my conversation with Margaret Feinberg. It was uplifting for me. And I love talking to another woman who's got energy, who's out in front going, come on, we're taking the hill, but can also get down and dirty and real about how she struggles and how she defines the parameters around self-care. My so what moment was really understanding again and really reinforcing that self-care is not about self, actually. Actually, it's about the community. I want to say a big thanks to my podcast team at Four Eyes Media for helping me bring this episode to you today. That's Amy Kerr, my producer, Caitlin Hine, who books our fabulous guests, and our executive producer, Laura Knightsling. And I want to thank you for being with us today. Join me for another great self-care conversation next week. And until then, live for what matters.
Thanks for joining Nancy for another episode of So What? Why It Matters. Come back next week for more lively conversation and answers to those so what moments in your life. And be sure to subscribe to the So What podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like the show, please give us a review and tell us why. And if you don't, as Nancy would say, so what? Just kidding. All your reviews matter. So until next time, live for what matters.